Hello, I'm Mark Armstrong. A year after a deadly collapse at the Port Arthur LNG construction site, we are looking back at the men who lost their lives, the warnings, the questions, and the fight over what really happened. Now, from the first live reports that morning to the company's own explanation to the courtroom battle that is still playing out, this is Deadly Fall, 1 year since the Port Arthur LNG scaffold collapse. And just before 2 o'clock on the morning of April 29th, 2025, disaster struck one of the biggest industrial projects in southeast Texas. 3 Bechtel workers were killed, 2 other workers were hurt after part of a jump form scaffolding system failed while crews were building a massive LNG storage tank at the Port Arthur LNG site in Sabine Pass. 12 News was there from the very first hours. In the dark before sunrise, emergency crews rushed to Port Arthur LNG site in Sabine Pass after a catastrophic collapse high above the ground. Workers, they had been building that massive concrete storage tank using a vertical jump form system, a platform designed to move up the structure as construction progressed. But something went horribly wrong. As the sun came up, the scale of the loss was only beginning to sink in. And in those first few hours, many of the biggest questions were still unanswered. Deputies with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office were the initial investigators on the scene. Captain Crystal Holmes, who has since retired, provided the first bits of information about what happened.
Families are being notified at this time. This is really early in the investigation to make any type of determination. The facility will be investigating, OSHA will be called in, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office obviously investigating as well. There was some type of failure in the scaffolding system. Not all employees landed on the ground. 2 of them were able to stay up. But all sustained injuries. Bechtel and the Sheriff's Office are all working together to find out exactly what happened.
And this story was never just about metal, concrete, and scaffolding. It was about the men who showed up to work and did not come home. Now, Reginald McGee, Felipe Mendez, and Felix Lopez Sr., whose family asked to not show his picture, their deaths sent shockwaves through their families and through the workforce building this massive project. Reggie McGee, he left behind a wife and children. Felipe Mendez, he left behind a wife and a young daughter. And in one of the most heartbreaking details to emerge, Lopez's son, Felix Lopez Jr., was also working at the site. He witnessed his father fall to his death with the others. For the families, it was a life-changing loss. Immediately after the accident, we were able to speak with Charles McLemore, who was friends with one of the victims, Reggie McGee.
A lot of people don't realize that every day you do jobs like that, like what Reggie did, you may not go home. We all loved Reggie. There was nobody out there that didn't like Reggie. Good dad. He always did things with his kids. We worked together. We could trust him. Anytime you need anything, ask him, he would do it. He was one of the good ones that we shouldn't have lost.
Now, immediately after the collapse, 12 News reached out to construction safety experts to weigh in on what could have gone wrong. University of Houston professor Lee Hart had mixed reactions, saying he was surprised that some apparent safety measures appeared to be absent, but also cautioning workers to not take their safety for granted.
One thing that kind of stood out to me is, they didn't have any additional fall protection in place, such as a vertical lifeline. Basically, once that scaffold begins to fall, it would act like a seatbelt almost, and it would hold them in place at that level until they could be rescued. Would have kept them from hitting the ground for sure. It'd be silly to think that I'm responsible for somebody else's safety or somebody else is responsible for my safety. I may be responsible as the employer for providing you all the necessary tools and training and equipment and knowledge, everything that you need to then go execute. But at the end of the day, it does require them to execute.
Now, to understand the scale of this story, you have to understand what Port Arthur LNG is. This is not a small job site. It's a massive export facility being built to supercool natural gas into liquid form so it can be shipped overseas. Now, companies behind the project, Sempra and ConocoPhillips, they have said that commercial operations are expected in 2027 and 2028. Even after the deadly collapse, construction on the project kept moving forward, including plans for a major Phase 2 expansion. So when the accident happened, it did not just happen on any construction site. It happened on one of the most significant energy projects in this region. Shortly after the collapse in April 2025, 12 News anchor Clay Rhodes, she had taken an in-depth look into the facility and its history up to that point.
Is absolutely paramount. to actually moving forward the energy transition. You know, it is a significantly cleaner fuel.
The resources that are already here, the ability to get natural gas and infrastructure here, but also the people.
Over 5,000 people. That's a head count at its peak. But it's more than that. That's probably about 10,000 people who are going to come through the doors of this site.
You know, we're focusing on things like education, workforce preparedness, environmental stewardship. This project consists of it's a natural gas liquefaction facility that will take U.S. natural gas that's produced in the country, liquefy it in our facility, and send it across the globe.
And within days of this collapse, a legal fight was already underway. Families of the men killed and injured, they went to court seeking to preserve evidence and find out exactly what happened. In April 2025, 12 News spoke to attorneys for the families of the victims.
They sent them to work and expected them to come home that night, and they'll never get to see him again. There was a simultaneous crane operation taking place. From what we've learned so far, the load fell onto that scaffolding that my clients were on and caused the scaffolding to tilt and our clients to fall off.
And in the immediate aftermath of the incident, a judge issued a temporary restraining order to help preserve the scene. But soon, another battle emerged. Plaintiffs, they argued that Bechtel had altered the site ahead of severe weather. The attorneys wanted to know who made those decisions, when they were made, and exactly what changed at the site. Bechtel said it acted to preserve evidence, not destroy it, and that the work was documented. And we were there in court in May 2025.
When a catastrophic event happens like this and people lose their lives, it's very important to see where the evidence is, the location of the evidence, and that it's maintained in a proper position. They cut a cable or removed some of the rigging, which altered the location of the evidence. They admitted that. The depositions is to find exactly what did happen, who did it, who made the decision, and if they want to offer why, explanation why, let them do it.
And months after the fight over the restraining order, the case took another turn. Bechtel asked a judge to send the case into private arbitration, arguing workers had agreed to handle the job-related disputes outside of public court. Then the broader cases were put on hold while a state panel decided whether the related lawsuits should be handled together. In March of this year, the panel ruled the pretrial process would move forward in Jefferson County, and within the last few weeks, new filings suggested one family is close to a settlement, though the terms have not been made public yet.
What they're trying to do is ultimately get this case moved out of, potentially out of Jefferson County and out of the court that it's currently pending in. There's ongoing legal proceedings in Judge Templeton's court related to Bechtel's purposeful violation of the judge's restraining order, and the consequences of that violation could be significant. It's a tactic to delay, it's a tactic to get the case moved potentially to a new forum in front of a new judge, and it's, at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's a tactic to try to avoid accountability.
Now in October 2025, Bechtel released its most detailed public explanation of what went wrong. The company said that the crew was installing the final section of the jump form system when a critical connection was not securely attached. Now, according to Bechtel, a bracket connection on the left side was not properly seated where it needed to be. The company said that that left the platform unstable. Now, once the crane rigging was released, the formwork, it slipped, rotated, and the crew fell. Bechtel says that all 5 workers had fall protection equipment, but the 3 men who died appeared not to have been tied off to an approved anchorage point when the platform collapsed. The 2 men who survived were attached and their falls were stopped. Now, Bechtel also identified broader failures. All 5 workers had fall protection gear that the project provided, but Bechtel says that when the platform rotated, 3 of the men who did not appear to be clipped into the approved anchor point, the other 2 workers were properly tied off and their falls were stopped. Bechtel says all 5 had received the basic fall protection training, but after the collapse, the company says that it changed its rules, which now include more training for supervisors, more clear instructions for this type of work, third-party review of fall protection training, and more oversight on job sites. Bechtel also says that fall protection violations, they can lead to termination. Now, Bechtel says that all 5 men on the crew, they were recent hires and had little or no experience with this kind of jump form work. The company says that they had gone through general fall protection training and had some hands-on experience on earlier shifts, but Bechtel also says that they had not received a 30-minute classroom training session that supervisors had prepared for the specific formwork system that they were using that night. And after the collapse, Bechtel says that it stopped this type of work company-wide, inspected all formwork systems, retrained crews, and created a new program to make sure that workers are fully trained and verified before doing this kind of high-risk work. Bechtel also says that 2 more workers on that crew, the foreman and the lead hand, they had experience to spot problems and correct hazards, but the company says that neither one of them was physically on the formwork when the collapse happened. Bechtel says that both men, they had been with the crew for most of the shift, but they were called away to help somewhere else just before the incident. After the collapse, Bechtel says that it changed its rules so that formwork jumping must be directly supervised by a trained and experienced foreman or leading hand, and that person must stay there until the system has been checked 3 times and confirmed secure. Bechtel also says that its own policy calls for newly hired craft workers to be paired with more experienced employees for about 4 weeks to help them learn the job and safety rules. But in this case, the company says that one of the mentoring did not happen. And after the collapse, Bechtel says that it changed its approach. The company now says supervisors will do weekly check-ins, newer workers will get added training and oversight, and crews will be built so that more than half of the team has been on site less than 3 months unless extra safety steps are put in place. Bechtel also says that high-risk construction work at night comes with its own extra dangers. The company says darkness, fatigue, and reduced supervision, it can all make a serious incident more likely. And so it says that when possible, this kind of high-risk work, it should be done during the day, not overnight. And after the collapse, Bechtel says that project supervisors now have to review any work planned for night shift, spell out how they're going to manage the risk, and get multiple high-level approvals before any high-risk night work can move forward. And Bechtel says that this collapse had exposed a bigger problem than just one bad connection or one crew. Perhaps the biggest revelation from the document was that the company says that its safety culture was not being applied consistently from senior management all the way down to workers doing the job. In other words, Bechtel says that the rules and expectations that were not being followed the same way at every level. After the collapse, the company says that it changed its shift start safety discussions to put more focus on life-critical work, and says that it is now trying to strengthen extra safety expectations across the entire company. And for lawyers representing the families, that report, it did not end the questions. It opened new ones. At the time of its release in October 2025, attorney Cade Burnson, who represents the family of Reggie McGee, said that Bechtel's own report was a PR stunt and claimed that it was a sanitized version of the truth. Well, and we have more from him.
Never seen a document like this before, signed from actually the president of the company. People need to understand that this is a very serious matter. We have friends, cousins, dads, brothers and sisters that work at these refineries and work at these big projects. We want them to be able to be safe, to go to work and come home safely. And when tragedy occurs and people die, the responsible parties need to be held accountable.
Well, a year later, Port Arthur LNG is still under construction, the project moving forward as the lawsuits go through the courts. 3 men are dead. Families are waiting for full answers, and the case now sits at the intersection of industrial safety, corporate responsibility, and the public's right to know what happened. For 12 News, this story has stretched from the first live reports that morning to the courtroom fights to the company's own explanation of how it says this happened. But the biggest questions, they matter still most. Could this have been prevented? Was the work being done safely? And will the families ever get the full account that they have been seeking since that morning in Sabine Pass? I'm Mark Armstrong. Thank you for joining us here for Deadly Fall, 1 year since the Port Arthur LNG scaffold collapse.